Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming. And it was nice. It took me so long to get from where I was having coffee through here, through all the crowds of kids with books. It's absolutely brilliant. It's actually really inspiring, I think, to come here and see so many people queuing up for books. Isn't that a great thing, rather than queuing up for, I don't know, fast food, But so here we are, my third visit to Malta, and a lot's happened, I think, in the last 3 years. One of which is, I think, the rights catalogue, which is what we're here to talk about a lot, is now in a really good position. Is this the second year now, or was this the first ever rights catalogue? The second, okay. And I think it's all about, how we're going to take it to the next stage as well. And my role has really been and continues to be a kind of representative for what you're doing here in the other markets, the bigger markets. And the rights catalogue is a really, really good tool for me to be able to talk about what's going on in Malta. So I'm just going to switch that off so you don't see my notes for the second. And but what I want to say, what we're going to do in the next hour is I'm going to give you a kind of overview of what I do when I'm pitching things and some examples. And I've tried to kind of work out a bit of a formula of how to put together, to take any book and then to find the right narrative arc that you need to sell it to somebody else. And then I thought we could also then look at the Malta Rights Catalogue and look at some specific pages on it. And I can either, there are 3 that I've looked at that I could give some feedback on in terms of, this is great, but this is what I would do to sort of change it. Or if anyone here in the audience has something in the rights catalogue that they'd like me to look at, as long as technology is working, I'm linked up to the website, so we have that. But I was just going to say to begin with, we're living in a world now, it's louder than it's ever been before. It seems to me, every hour, every few seconds, something flashes, pings, vibrates, or pops up demanding our attention. And the way my brain is wired, I find it very, very difficult to find focus because sometimes you're being pulled in many, many different directions. And I think all these messages, they're usually saying to us something like, look at this, buy that, click here, listen now, don't miss out. And inside that noise, we are somehow expected to find space for things that really matter, because none of this really matters at all. But what we've got to remember is that we're in this nice silent space and we're kind of talking, whereas out there you can hear the background noise, and that we've got to imagine ourselves going out there and then saying something that very quickly makes people stop and listen to what we're saying. And I think that's the world we're pitching into. So it's not really just a presentation. It's about it's an act of focus, if you like. It's an invitation to step out of that noise. It's a way of saying to someone who's already heard 100 voices that day, just to let them think, okay, I'll give that person 30 seconds and I'll show you something worth keeping. So, I mean, the irony is that we all know exactly what that feeling is like. We all know that feeling of being captivated, absorbed, and locked into something that lets the world fall away. For me, when I'm reading lots of books, the way when I get excited and I know that I can bring something to this as an agent is when I forget that I'm reading a book. That thing when you can almost, your ears almost sort of stop hearing and you go into this little zone. And we all have a childhood memory of that, don't we? Where you're in that suspended pocket of time where you're lying on the floor or curled up in a chair and you're reading and you look up and the clock has kind of moved forward at a speed you don't understand. And I remember coming back from school, and doing my homework and then putting the television on, and because this was in the 1970s, television didn't start until about 5 o'clock. So there was just this sort of ticking clock going like this. And I thought, oh, what's the most exciting thing I can do now? Where can I escape? And it would be to take a book down and go and read. And I think that thrill of stepping through that doorway and finding yourself somewhere new and traveling with a book is something that certainly our generation, where everybody in this room remembers the pre-digital age. Whereas those kids out there, I'm really excited that they want to escape into books rather than just handheld devices. So, but what we've got to do is we've got to remind everybody with our pitches why that experience is still going to be worthwhile. And of course, what we're selling with a pitch is we're not selling the book, we're selling the promise of the book, aren't we? It's a bit like going to the cinema and you see a trailer and you think, oh, that's something I'd like to go and see. You're not watching the whole film and then making a decision. So we're not, so a pitch is ultimately trying to sell something. It's not selling the plot or the positioning, sometimes not even the idea itself. What we're selling in the first 20 seconds is the promise that this is going to take you somewhere. And I always say to novelists, the world doesn't need another book. So what this book has got to do is got to persuade the editor that in some way they need this one because it's going to enable them to see the world that we're in a slightly enriched or different way. And I think that's really, really important. But to create that moment of trust, we've got to cut through the noise, haven't we? And we've got to assume that, imagine I'm at the Frankfurt Book Fair and every half an hour, everybody moves around to another meeting. It's like a kind of literary speed dating. And you sit there and yeah, of course, everybody wants to buy, publishers want to buy books because that's what's going to define them. And agents want to sell them because that's what's going to define our success or not. But you don't sit in front of a publisher for half an hour and tell them all the books you've got. You know your audience, don't you? You pick the right book for the right people. And I think that's really important in face-to-face. And I think, when I was in Frankfurt and I had a half an hour meeting with a Tamil publisher who publishes one of my authors, it was at the end of the day and I was thinking, oh, I've got to wait around for this meeting. I hope it's going to be worth it. And then I sat down, really connected with this guy, and I could see his stand. I could see what he was interested in. And within about 3 or 4 minutes, there was a book that I was talking about that I put my script away, if you like, and we were excited about, and I've sent it to him. And I didn't bother talking about all the other ones because I knew that it was utterly pointless. So people buy from people. It's sort of cliche, but it's absolutely true. And obviously the challenge of what you have with the Rights Guide is that people are buying from a catalogue. They're not necessarily having the opportunity face-to-face to actually see your passion as a publisher or as an author about your project. So obviously one of the many good things about the catalogue is you've got the ability to have the QR code. So, they can link to, I'm guessing, to anything you want, to your publisher's website or to video material or whatever. And certainly our agents in China, they always want my authors to make a video about their book, for me to give them a QR code and me to upload it somewhere in the back of YouTube so they can see the author talking. And this used to be a challenge with, languages and things. But clearly, the Chinese said to me, oh, don't worry, if you send us a video with the author speaking in their own language, we can just subtitle it and the translation will be really good. So, technology is challenging at the moment, but it's also got some great opportunities, particularly when we were trying to bridge those kind of gaps. For the record, though, I don't think AI can do good translations of books, but I think they can help us with our business, really can do. So I think the Rights Catalogue is a brilliant document, but it does exactly what the Rights Catalogue should do in a crowded marketplace. It means Malta can sit alongside the Curtis Brown Catalogue or Penguin US. It's a book there, and it's another portal. It's a way into something. It's clear, it's confident, and it presents Maltese writing with the same authority and professionalism that any other major international agency should do. And it kind of says, we're here, we have serious authors, and we deserve a bigger seat at the table than we've currently got. And I think that's the key thing. But I think like all good innovation, it is the real value isn't in year one or year two. It's in what it moves to become, because we're always being told that the iPhone that was the brilliant one last year, we need to get another one. And there's always something, isn't there, that does it. So this is all about refining what you've already got. But I think it's a brilliant, brilliant place to be in, because there are many countries that don't have anything like this at all. So what I want to do is just sort of dial back a little bit to the whole notion of, what the pitch is. And I know this is really going to be about, I want there to be some real takeaways for you, not just to be kind of me just going on about, whatever. So I want you to shout out if you want to ask questions during it, and not just wait till the end, because inevitably there'll be no time at the end. There never is. So the pitch that got you here today was that we're going to perfect your pitch for the rights catalogue. So how many of you here are already in the catalogue in some iteration? None of you. Okay, that's good. Can anybody be in the catalogue? So I'm asking you, Simona, because it was your baby. Yeah. Right, okay. So, I would say if you're not in the catalogue, you're missing an opportunity, because that catalogue will be carried around the world in people's bags, people I've given it to, people who have picked it up off the stand. So this year I went to Frankfurt, and I usually do a kind of traditional little folded piece of paper. But I thought this year I'm just going to grab my bag and I'll show you the actual thing. I thought it'd be good to do something that looked a bit like, a newspaper, because when you come into the book fair every morning, on your table, there's copies of the bookseller, and actually pass these around if you like. And so I thought it'd be quite fun just to do something that looked a bit like it was an editorial thing. Clearly it's got my name and branding at the top, but hopefully people only realize that after 2 minutes, and they think, hang on, all these books are represented by Simon. How's that the case? So we put this together just using Canva, I think, which is a good bit of software. And I thought, well, my lead title I'm going to put this novel by Neil Tully called The Visit on the front. And this is quite an interesting one just to look at, because we've managed to get quotes from people like Colin Toybeen, Donal Ryan, John Boyne, some amazing literary greats. But this is the cover of the book, which is it's quite quiet, and it's about a small community in the middle of Ireland in 1963 where cracks begin to appear in the world that they know, and the relationships. And in a small community, it doesn't take much to bring things to the surface. So that's how the publisher's selling it. But how I'm selling it is that what actually creates this moment when the world starts to look at this community is that John F. Kennedy, and this is based on a true story, in 1963, he decides to go to Ireland to visit the community where his ancestors were born. So the visit is John F. Kennedy visiting, and there's a poignancy about it because it's John F. Kennedy's last ever foreign trip before he's assassinated. So Ireland particularly they felt, the grief when he died was global, but for Ireland, for this community, clearly they felt it in a very different way. It's like one of their own. So I thought, surely we've got these quotes. The publisher, for some reason, hasn't got any of the quotes on the front of the book at this stage. And we've got JFK. Again, the publisher hasn't got that. So I thought, if we put Literary Greats Hail the JFK novel, it's a bit cheesy as a headline, but it's kind of saying John F. Kennedy. It's saying we've got endorsements from great people. To have Colin Toybeen describe a debut novel as brilliant and intriguing, you think, that to me is newsworthy. So I put that on the front, and that's had a really good result already, and lots of people have asked to see the manuscript. And then I've got some other stories at the bottom, because you don't want it just to feel like it's just about one thing. And then inside on nonfiction, I've got one new signing on the right and an ongoing author. But you can see as it's passing around, it's a nice little dynamic document, and I think it's something we will. I never like to do anything twice, but it's something we will probably revisit. because it's in a small agency like me. I've only got about 12 clients, so I need to make a bit more noise than just a piece of paper with 12 books on it. And I know in the rights catalogue, you're allowed up to 5, or the publisher's allowed up to 5 entries. So it's really about, I haven't included every single one of my authors in here, every one of their books. And that's why I'm not showing this document to my clients, because they will then have an issue about why I'm not prioritizing everything they're doing. But, as an agent, you've got to kind of make decisions about, how you best deploy your energy at any one time. So, yeah, knowing your audience. I mean, I talked about, I sat down in front of my Tamil publisher and I could see what he published. And then I realized, his list was a combination of things which are going to sell well in the Indian market on the educational front, and then some international books, mainly from countries that he could get a grant to help them translate. So you have the translation fund here, the book fund. Ireland has a very, very busy fund there. So he published. He's publishing Paul Lynch's Booker Prize-winning novel Prophet Song. But then I realized, I pitched The Visit to him because, again, he'd get a grant for that. And I pitched John Boyne as well. And he seems really interested in those. So, that's really, really important. I remember as a kind of baby agent going to Frankfurt and having a meeting with the head of Doubleday, which was a big part of Penguin. And I was meeting the president, Steve Rubin, and I had my little list of books, and I went through the whole thing, every book, and he just went, no, 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 maybe, no, no, no. And then we got to the end, and he just said, so what are we going to do for the next 27 minutes? I mean, that was literally 3 minutes. So that was a disaster, really. I mean, what I should have done is picked one book and really gone in depth, because in his mind, at the end of the meeting, I was the person that he'd said no to for 99% of the books. Whereas if I just said, I've got lots of things, I'd rather just focus on this one thing, I don't know, I am respecting his position. I'm showing that I understand what he does. And I'm also showing that I've given some thought to the meeting. Again, it's challenging when you're doing this on paper, but I think you've got to, if it's a publisher with 5 pages, they've got to think realistically, do these books have a chance of selling internationally? And it's difficult, because the truth is sometimes that with a lot of nonfiction, let's say, and we'll get onto that nonfiction can do brilliantly in its own market, but it's parochial. It's aimed at somebody who understands, London, or they understand, Malta, and it's very difficult to think this will then get a broader market. But again, it's good to research which books have done well internationally, isn't it? And then that will give you an idea about whether you think possibly yours will. Now, I was just thinking here that I worked for an American firm, and I realized that the Brits and the Americans, we speak a completely different language. And I started by being kind of just being myself, because I think in life that's really important. So I'd be kind of a bit sort of apologetic, a bit Hugh Grant about it, a bit kind of, well, almost feeling imposter syndrome, like, why am I here? But, seeing as I am, I'll tell you about something. And I realized that just didn't work, because if I sent a pitch email out to my colleagues just saying, we've just signed this new author, because I'm pitching for their attention at this point, I didn't get any response at all. Whereas if I sent out the kind of American approach to this, which is much more the kind of, well, if it was Donald Trump, it would be like, people tell me I'm the greatest agent in the world, But the American approach is you would send out a message saying, in a fight with 7 other agencies, we've beaten them and we've won this author. It was about aggressive verbs and all of that. I'd send that out. I'd get 27 people immediately coming back going, you're crushing it, you're killing it, and this was a sort of made me realize that you can't pitch the same way to everybody, because actually people have they have a kind of different understanding of kind of linguistics, really. And you just have to listen to a Hollywood film trailer for a movie, and you realize that there's no room really for anything other than action points, conflict, emotion, stress, and a sense of the journey the central characters are going on. So I think it's important to try to look at something from many different angles like that. And I was just thinking, well, the ultimate example of that would be, could we have a kind of formula? So I looked at what's the essential kind of fiction pitch formula, and we'll come on to non-fiction. So it's a strong attention grabbing hook. And I guess if we just talk about this in vagaries to begin with, and then I'll give you some real examples. And then there's a clear protagonist with a goal, because I think there needs to be a hero or an anti-hero we need to follow through. And you think about films as an example, you know, we think about Bourne, or we think about James Bond, or we think about Jack Reacher. You know, they are the people that we are seeing the world through and we are cheering for. And there needs to be a conflict or an obstacle, and what are the stakes, and what's going to make that story unique. So there's that famous Flash Gordon movie where I think at some point the female lead says to Flash Gordon, I love you, but we've only got 14 hours to save the world. And you think, well, that's great. What a great pitch. So you've got this conflict here, haven't you? And what's going to happen in 14 hours' time? The world isn't going to exist anyway. So immediately you're drawn into that. So the building blocks. So, you know, with the hook, the character, the goal, the conflict's really important. Stakes, why this story, and then comparable titles are always really good, because certainly in the book world, people always want to think about the audience. Who do they think is going to be reading this book? Who do I think is going to be reading this book? So, you know, if this will appeal to the same people who, I don't know, like Stranger Things, or this is a book for people who love Succession. They don't necessarily have to be books. They can be media events, things on the telly. I think that's important. Because if we don't know who we think our market is, then the likelihood is a publisher isn't going to help the book out on that front. And then we put it together. So you keep it really short, you know, be really specific. There isn't really any room for brevity at all, and tailor to the audience. And then obviously don't reveal the ending. Lovely dog. Yeah, don't give the ending away, I think, because that there's no real reason there, is there, to dive in. And I think we're talking a lot here about commercial fiction, because I think the perfect pitch for a literary novel is you just say, just read it. You know, it's very difficult to know, how does somebody get you to read a literary novel? A literary novel is all about that moment that you forget you're reading the book and you're inside, and you suddenly come out thinking, I'm now seeing the world differently. I think a lot of commercial fiction, it's kind of fast food, isn't it? But fast food is sometimes exactly what you need in life. And it's no surprise that, you know, I got on my EasyJet flight and people were reading paperback commercial airport novels. They weren't sitting there reading Dostoevsky, you know, lovely a thought as that would be. So these are completely made up examples that I think follow what I'm talking about. So we've got a grieving widower, so we know who the person is, sets out to finish his wife's abandoned travel journal, but every destination reveals a secret she hid from him. Okay, so I think that as a pitch, that's not bad. I think what it doesn't have, though, we're not sure why he's doing it. And there's a danger with that pitch that it could just be very episodic. There needs to be something bigger that is drawing him to the end. You know, he's got to finish his wife's abandoned travel journal for some reason, but every destination. And then we've got a burnt out teacher discovers one of her students can predict accidents and must decide whether to expose the gift or protect the child. So, you know, that's a very different genre. But again, it's interesting. And I think if a pitch can make you think, I wonder what's the answer at the end of that book, then you've got people you've got people immediately. I think if a book can ask a question at the beginning that it answers at the end, then that's a pretty good thing. And then an exiled chef returns home to reclaim his family restaurant, only to find his brother is using the kitchen for a criminal enterprise. Well, there's kind of prodigal son going on there. I mean, there are no new plots, are there? They're basically all in the Bible or somewhere else. But I mean, I think that would be stronger if the chef had just come out of prison, possibly, and was trying to go straight, and then suddenly was being sucked into that criminal enterprise. But these are completely made up, and there's just three other ones. I'll just pick one. I mean, this is a silly one, isn't it? A climate scientist races to decode a century-old weather journal before a once-in-a-lifetime storm wipes out her only proof. Well, I kind of feel I've seen that film, but that's not a bad thing, is it? So I think those can form fairly, to that kind of formula. And I think with nonfiction, it's sort of simpler. It's like, why does the world need this book? What does it add to what exists? Why this author and why now? Because a book which is, particularly in the ages of now of AI, you've got to feel that non-fiction is really bringing something extra. It's not just about, here is the research, because we can all find research these days. It's about somebody aggregating it and coming up with an argument using that research that is going to enable you to see the world differently. Okay, so with that, what's the problem the book addresses? What's the transformation for the reader? Who's going to buy it? And what's the competition? And now clearly, if you look at kind of mind, body, spirit books, there are lots of books saying, how to get the corner office, or what they won't tell you at Harvard Business School. So there's a kind of clickbait element to that, or how to drop a dress size in 4 weeks, or how to whatever. You think, I'm going to buy this, and for 10 years I'm going to be transformed, and I'm going to walk off a different person. So that's what it's trying to do there. And obviously within our proposal, we need to make sure that it's very clear what the tone and approach of the book is, what kind of primary research will be done, and the author's platform. And I think that's something very important in the rights catalogue. If the author already has an audience of some description, if they have social media, or if they are big they do a lot of business talks or whatever it might be, publishers love that, because they're immediately thinking, we can publish to an existing audience rather than necessarily just have to find a new market for it. And I think we're finding a lot of people if you go onto LinkedIn, it seems to be everybody's the author of a best-selling book now. Well, I think what they're actually doing is they're realizing that there are lots of people out there with ideas, but if you can create a book as an influencer, whatever you want to call yourselves, and then when you go to a pitch meeting and you say, I'd like to have a copy of my book, that there's a book still has a presence, doesn't it? It's a very effective business card in that situation. And often the best selling is something that is basically means they've given away a lot of copies to people. But anyway, I think that's and these are just some silly examples, but I think, so I was just imagining a book called After the Apology, How to Repair Relationships in a Culture of Outrage. And I said, well, why does the world need it? As I said, that relationships are collapsing under miscommunication, defensive behavior, online shaming. What does it add? It's a practical model for reconciliation drawn from psychology, justice, and mediation. And the author is going to be, this fictional author I've created is a conflict resolution expert who's worked with families, businesses, and governments. And why do we need it now? Well, post-pandemic, social media call-outs made repair an urgent skill. So I think that's to my mind, that's quite a compelling package. And I think if that book can't answer the 4 questions, then I suppose one has to think there's something missing. Maybe it's not the right author, maybe it's not the right time. And then there's another one about a particular obsession with me about focus, Silent Out, Why We Can't Focus. And I said, we're living through the greatest attention crisis in human history. And again, this is going to bring science and roadmap. We had toolkit in the last one, but roadmap, rebuilding focus. and we've got an author who's a cognitive neuroscientist who spent 20 years researching, and then we need it because of AI and notifications and all of that. So to me, I think that those two, they can answer those four questions. And I think any pitch that one puts together, you've got to make sure that those questions are there. And in fact, I've never seen anybody do a pitch where they actually have it like this with the questions, but it's quite, thinking about it, it's quite a good way of doing it. It's quite a sort of very, very quick way of giving an editor the ammunition they need to answer questions with somebody else in a meeting when they're deciding whether they want to invest in the project. So, and I was just thinking, you know, if we looked at some real world examples of things that we all know, I mean, we all know about Murder on the Orient Express, but I just thought how, assuming somebody doesn't know about it, what's the pitch? I think the murderer is with us on the train now, which is that's quite a kind of good. It takes the locked room thing one step further, but you know that's quite a compelling, you know, capital line on there. I mean, this tells us, you know, the passengers stabbed a dozen times, door locked from the inside, and Poirot is on the train, and go back to that, and you know, in a way, they could just say, "You all know this story, but buy it." But there's still some attempt there, isn't there? And they're saying at the end that the world's greatest detective, Hercule Poirot, must identify the prime suspects, blah blah blah, before the murderer decides to strike again. So that is again using the formula that we've talked about, isn't it? It's giving us a character, it's giving us a situation, it's giving us conflict, and it's giving us something that will happen at the end if he doesn't solve it. In this case, it's not the world ending in 14 hours, it's somebody murdering again. So, you know, that, again, I think Amazon is a real friend of all of ours, because if you want to know, if you're stuck about how to pitch a book, so there have never been more resources out there. And I think, you know, just picking a book like that is you know, it's quite an interesting one. I've got the Beatles, Mark Lewison here, because about 2011, I got an email from Mark Lewison saying he wanted to write a biography of the Beatles. And I, you know, I immediately went onto Amazon and discovered that there were, if you put in Beatles into the book section, there was like 897 books on the Beatles. So I emailed Mark back and I said, great, there are 897 books on the Beatles. Why you? Why now? Why do you think this is going to work? And he came back with a, you know, astonishing, kind of compelling argument why he wanted to write a 1,000,000-word, 3-volume biography. And from everything he said and the research I did about him, I realized that he was the man. He was the man that the world had been waiting for to try and put some context around that amazing phenomenon. And it was only the other day, actually, on YouTube, I realized that the Beatles broke up before any of them were 30. I mean, and that's kind of astonishing. I look at my son who's 31 and I think, yeah, he's done quite a lot in his life, but just think what those four boys from Liverpool did. It's just amazing. But Mark published volume 1 in 2013. The idea was that we were going to publish volume 2 2 years later, and then volume 3. Clearly, he's now 12 years late for volume 2, but it'll be worth it. And the level of research he did is just astonishing. And I think his archive will be worth a lot of money. But I had to go to the market with pitching a book that was going to be 1,000,000 words long, that was on a subject being covered a lot, and was going to take many, many years, and needed a lot of money to fund him. So the first line of my pitch was, why does the world need another Beatles book? And then I think it said, if you go on Amazon, there are 857 books, blah, blah. And then I just sort of built up this sense of, it was kind of negative selling, really. Then we turned the page and I said, you know, Mark Lewison's book will not be the last book on the Beatles, but it will be the lasting book, you know. And it was a bit cheesy, but actually I think it made a compelling argument about, well, we don't mind about all the other books because this is going to be the one. This is one people are going to come back to. And it was very successful as in terms of a pitch. And we got some very good deals, which again, I said the author needs to be paid an annual salary for 10 years rather than most book deals are based on when you sign, deliver, and publish. And we even got it index linked. So I managed to say, well, if inflation goes up, he gets paid more. I mean, this was all great and brilliant. I mean, until 7 years later when he hadn't delivered anything and the publishers realized they'd already given him 70% of the money because of the deal, how we'd structured it. So we had to reorganize it then. But actually, it's a terrific book. And yeah, so I think that's the kind of, and publishers in a way, sometimes they like these like big projects that they have to really invest in because they think this is going to be a backbone of our publishing for the next, 40, 50 years. So yeah, for me, the way of pitching it was tell them all the reasons why they probably shouldn't buy it to begin with, and then come in and tell them why. Because I knew if I didn't do that, they'd go on Amazon and they'd find out how many books there were on the Beatles. So anyway, that was a quick one. And then Tunnel Vision, briefly, fantastic novel set on the London Underground. It's the night before the central character is getting married, and he realizes that his entire future depends on him going to every stop on the London Underground within one working day because his passport has been hidden somewhere by something. All the various things he needs for the rest of his life have been stolen by a rival and put around the Underground. Now, it's a terrific book, and but originally when I read it, it was just about two friends challenging each other to go around the Underground on one day. And I said to Keith, the author, I still look after today, but why? If we don't give them a real reason, this is just going to be a kind of geeky train book. So I suggested that his future depended on it, and Keith liked the idea, and then kind of reworked the book to put all these various credit cards, passports, tickets, whatever. I mean, it slightly dates it back to an analog era, but it gave the book another energy. And then when I was pitching the book to people, that was it. I led with, this bet, this challenge that this guy has to undergo, otherwise his future is going to collapse. So, it's about, so I, as a joke, I was thinking, how would you pitch the Holy Bible to someone who didn't know anything about religion or the Quran? And I think that's this is the kind of moment that gets me cancelled probably. But I suppose, if you don't know anything about religion, if you're sitting down with a child in a classroom who doesn't come from a background and you try and pitch the Bible or the Quran to them, you can't use words like religion, you can't talk about God because these are concepts they don't understand. That's the real test, isn't it? But I suppose when you start thinking that these are books which in some way decode the world we're in, don't they? They're the books about what made us into the human race we are, and they're deep and they're philosophical works, and but they're also full of great stories, aren't they? So there's something in there about the kind of the need we have to tell stories and for us to pass things on through kind of oral history. And I think that's again, it's a really interesting notion, that, isn't it? That when we all read the Bible at school, if that's what we did, I don't think the teachers thought we were all going to go off and become, priests or nuns or whatever. But there's things in the Bible that I think teach you life lessons, don't they? So actually, it's a good way of thinking about, if you had to pitch something, if you apply these various rules to it, then something will come to the surface, won't it? And I just thought it'd be useful before we looked at before we looked at the rights guide. David Hyam, very, very successful British agency. They have, they produce a rights guide every year. This should load up here. And again, talking about resources, I mean, all the major agencies now, they all have their rights guides up there. So, it's quite useful just to flick through here and just see, is there anything we can take from this? And I think what's interesting, just flicking these up, that all of these start with, a, there's a log line, it's what you call in America, in Hollywood. So in this one, it's a haunting and incantatory, can't pronounce that this morning, literary novel of urban alienation from award-winning author Jacqueline Crooks. Well, that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, that sentence, isn't it? So the author, they won awards, and it's literary, and roughly what the subject's about. And I should think this is probably what they do on every one. Yeah, look, unsettling, deeply mattered, and dark literary horror novel. And with this one, because clearly the author isn't award-winning or internationally best-selling, they're leading there with what's the book, and then we have a 3-paragraph description here about the book, and then the last paragraph set over a 3-week period when the hotel becomes a stage because they're filming a TV show there, brimming with body horror, full of pin-sharp writing, ferocious noticing. Not sure if I like that. Saint Death is a novel which examines inherited ghosts, thwarted desires, and our relationship with our physical selves. Well, and they've got some quotes below, so for previous books. So I think that's effective, and I think you'd be very, if you read that, you're going to know whether or not it's going to be something for you if you're a publisher. I'll just choose one more, and then we'll look at the non-fiction. And then this one has just got New York Times best-selling, which helps. And then they've gone for the kind of 2 women, a chance meeting. Friendship is the love story you can count on. So this isn't a romance, but it's about love. So immediately you think this is more kind of reading group fiction. This is a kind of book that you can imagine people getting together and discussing. And, down the left, you can see all of the, the fact it's sold in, the previous books obviously sold in lots of countries, and tells you how many pages it is and all of that. And there's some quotes as well for previous books. So, I think, and again, you just know from that cover, it's a different kind of book to some of those other ones. So if we can just scroll down to non-fiction. No, it says we're still in fiction here, but because it's a big catalogue, isn't it? Yeah, and you know straight away now, look at that. No way off, no one to trust, no time left. And again, the only thing that doesn't have is a central character that we're going to follow. But oh, there we go. It's Abby and her team on a rescue mission in the South Atlantic. So yeah, they haven't let us down on that front. I mean, it does make you realize there are a lot of books, doesn't it? Okay, so this is a non-fiction book called The Reflex Trap, Understanding the Defense Mechanisms That Hold You Back. And there we go. She's best-selling author and trained psychotherapist Eleanor Morgan. And then it tells you the book is going to hopefully set you free. So there are big claims there, aren't there? But I think, joking apart, we can see that kind of formula that I put together a few slides ago, they really are, it's not rocket science. Everybody's doing it. And, this book here, Soviet Union as a Civilization, called Exit Stalin. And, you can immediately see the kind of quality of editors who are publishing that. This is going to be one of those serious big blocks of nonfiction that is going to define that era. Here we go, 752 pages. So, this is, I think these, and I literally just chose one of the many agencies out there. And I think if you're ever writing blurb or catalog copy or a pitch, why not, artist theft, isn't it? Go off and borrow these ideas from people, because as I say, they seem to have, what I came up with in isolation seems to be exactly what everybody else is doing. So there must be some truth in it, really. I'm interested in when you put the television on and you've got Sky, let's say, and they have to catch your attention and get you to click in a tiny number of words, don't they? And I think that, again, these people are geniuses at it, and they're like the kind of people who write tabloid headlines, please. Yeah.
Subject from they check the social media, they check Instagram, YouTube channels of the author. Does the author have to have a lot of followers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt now that, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, that when I started, I'd read an article somewhere and I'd think, well, that's good, that's an interesting piece, and I'll track down the author, and then you'd end up with have a conversation, and you'd sell the book. But I think now publishers are even, that's the camera. My goodness, that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Or is it one of those ones that goes all the way around? Technology, eh? It's terrible. Send me an invoice afterwards. It's fine. Yeah. No. Yeah, but I think now if somebody has a platform, then that's a really, if they've already got 20,000 followers on social media and they are the world expert on their subject, then immediately that's going to make a difference. So yeah, I would search. And the second question is about how do you get an agent, was it? I think actually, we could do a whole session on writing letters to agents, whatever. But actually, a lot of what we're talking about here is if I'm getting an approach, which I do constantly from people looking for a representation, then, if the letter basically kind of embodies all of these things that we have here, then, I'm well away. I mean, because clearly, it should be a first person. It should be someone who's talking about their passion. And I'm very good, as we all are, you can pick up on someone's passion for something. So for me, I mean, if this woman were to write to me and say, I'm a leading philosopher and I've written a collection of essays, that's probably not going to immediately call me in. But the next paragraph she talks about, it's a collection of essays seeks to transform the language we use to understand love. Well, for me, that's more compelling. So it's really, in this situation, that thing in bold at the top is to catch our attention, isn't it? But if I'm reading a letter, I'm going to read the whole thing. So I think sometimes you need to lead off with something that is asking a question, and I think I need to read the rest of the letter to get the answer. And the question might be, how can we transform language to better understand love, I suppose. But I mean, generally, if you're looking for an agent, it really is one of the great things now is everybody now has a website. So if I were you, just find the authors that you think your book will appeal to the same audience for, find out who their agent is, look at the website, see if they are accepting unsolicited material, follow the rules, and write a kind of passionate letter. And don't, sounds crazy, but if the rules are, we don't want to receive any attachments or anything, we just want an email from you describing the project, that's what you need to do. But it's amazing how many times, I will say, I don't represent cookbooks, let's say, and I'll get a letter saying, I know you say that you don't represent cookbooks, but I'm sending you a cookbook. And you just think, okay, that's a waste of their time and my time. So, so look, the resources are out there. As I say, I've just chosen one agency, but there are, this, for me, this is absolute gold dust. And frankly, having put this together, I know that I'm going to go back to other agencies and look and think, well, how would they describe this book? And then that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with it. And this is, I mean, I don't know what's their, it's their rights guide just done for Frankfurt this year. So, and if we went on their website, you'd see there are, there's one for London, there's one for Bologna. I mean, clearly there's probably a lot of books that stay in there, or they're probably not necessarily new to the catalogue, but there might be something that was an idea last year and this year has now been published, or so there are things that are being published in there. But yeah, that's a lot of books, isn't it? One agency, yeah. So we look at that, and let's go on to this. Sorry, it's going crazy now. And then if we look, so we have our literature from Malta Catalogue. So what I would say about this catalogue is obviously with an agency or a publisher, they are creating a kind of language for that whole catalogue. And we know that with the David Hyam one, that after a while, you turn the page, you know exactly where everything is going to be, and you know where the information is that you need. So I think it's great here that with this catalogue, at the bottom, we know that all the rights information is going to be running along the bottom. We've got the book jacket, we've got that. I think what's interesting though is obviously is that every publisher has 5 pages. They're all doing things slightly differently, and I think this one here, for instance, we can zoom in. This is great. Look, it's got "this book will appeal to readers of," and that's brilliant because I don't know Shannon and Dina Hale, but clearly I'm guessing they've chosen authors that have a particularly big representation in a particular market. So that's really good, and they've gone for this kind of boxed text here, talking about why they think it should work for an international audience, which I think is great. And then we've got the description of the book on the right. Unless I am okay, yeah, there we go. So we have the author biog on the left, so we know an emerging Maltese author. I mean, what I would say is probably all those other books we've looked at and those other catalogues, they've led with the book first and then the author. And whereas this obviously leads with the author, and I think if I were editing it, maybe I would just move things around slightly. And then obviously, yeah, I was looking at this one, I think looked really interesting, the Bizarre Malta one. And again, this leads with the author, but I think this is probably underselling it slightly, because it says at the bottom, the book will appeal to readers of, and then there's a list of books. And then there's a little blurb here, which is slightly generic. And I think it's slightly cliched, but I think if you led with 5 or 6 bullet points of things that you'd be surprised to know about Malta, those kind of things that would make you say to someone, I didn't know X, Y, or Z, then in a way you want to go into that book, don't you? Whereas I think at the moment, the only thing that's coming is it says mysterious, quirky, wonderful. Okay, but I think there are a lot of the British Museum in London. They decided they had this enormous collection that only 10% of it's ever on display to the public at any time. And the then director of the museum, Neil McGregor, decided that he was going to try and define what the British Museum was by choosing 100 objects. And he chose 100 objects that told their story. And then it became a radio series in the BBC where he just talked for 5 minutes once a week about one of the objects. That ran for 2 years. So the book was a huge success. And lots of other institutions have now done that. Because in this kind of in this very busy world we're in, it's like that bucket list thing, isn't it? 101 things to do before you die, or 25 things I wish I'd known at the age of 18. It's sort of, I don't know, there's something dynamic and draws you in. And I think with the Bizarre Malta, it looks like a fantastic book, but I think they should probably, in a catalogue, possibly give you a few more nuggets in a trailer that would make you want to buy it. And then I was looking at this, the Azzopardi one, the Wesley Azzopardi, great package, and you absolutely know the market that's going for. And it says, will appeal to readers of Silence of the Lambs, The Alienist, and one I don't know, Shine by Ella Frears. Again, I would swap this round and I'd put the box stuff at the beginning, because I'm not saying the author isn't relevant, but you're buying into the subject matter here, aren't you? And I put the author down at the bottom. But I think this is a good example for me. This is a genre. The publisher knows the genre, but I think they need to sell the book rather than the author at that point. And again, I really like in this catalogue, the things like it says novel, adult, horror. So you know what you're looking for, and you can go and find it. And again, back to you. And there's obviously a house style, isn't there, with the publisher, with the Firaxa, with the kind of covers they do. And I'd also say something I don't think I did a slide on, but I think the title of a project is really important, isn't it? Because the obscure and back for you, they're both really good titles, and they both do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the pitch, don't they? Back for you, that asks many questions, doesn't it? And then when you see the cover, you realize that isn't necessarily this isn't necessarily going to be a good thing, is it, for this character if someone's coming back for them with a jacket like that? So I think have a think about titles as well. And again, those business books I quoted earlier on, like, How to Get the Corner Office, they're basically just books aimed at middle managers who want to get some advancement in their organizations. But actually, what that book title is it's selling the promise that buy this book and you'll suddenly have that corner office with the glass that we've all seen in the TV shows. And I think you can't do that with fiction, but with non-fiction, I think it is sometimes about selling the promise. I did a book years and years ago written by an Australian advertising guy called Paul Wilson. And it was basically a book about how to have less stress in your life. It was just full of a lot of techniques to get rid of stress. But he called it The Little Book of Calm. And it sold millions and millions of copies. And it was this little square book, and it sat by the till. And it was almost impossible not to just buy one as you left, because it was very well priced. Those days, $2.99. And they literally sold millions of copies and had a lovely cloud on the front. And anyway, just a book about stress. But if it's called The Little Book of Stress, no one's going to want to take stress home with them, but everybody wants to take calm, don't they? So again, you're selling the destination. Like all the diet books don't say how to be less fat, do they? Because no one's going to buy that. But, how to look your best, how to look 10 years younger, TV shows, it's all about formats. So, again, I think this catalogue it's just so good to see, because I think it shows you in one place the kind of variety and diversity of what's going on. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge, and I think that's the challenge that the National Book Council have kind of stepped up to with the fund, which is available to apply for, where you can get some sample material translated. And I think that's important, because otherwise people will just go and put things into artificial intelligence and translate it, which will be utter nonsense. But I mean, I really hope that language shouldn't be a barrier, because I think you realize once you strip away the language something's written in, we're all human beings. There's a commonality to experience and stories and all of that. So yeah, I think just apply for the money. And if you've got abilities to write in English as well yourself, then just a question I asked here a few years ago when I was moderating a panel: if you translated your own work, would it feel different to you in one language or the other? I mean, I think the whole role of translation is fascinating, particularly in literary fiction, because it's all about this. It's all about that tone, isn't it? It's all about the sense that you create as a writer. And I can understand how a John Grisham can be translated into German, and it probably won't lose anything that John Grisham wanted it to have. But a delicate literary novel, or even poetry translated into another language, it's challenging. But it's nice to see that the International Man Booker Prize or various other prizes now for works in translation, the translator is a co-winner of the prize. So they are kind of recognizing that they're a very important part of the journey. I'm just seeing we've got about another 10 minutes. So I'll just go back and see what other things I wanted to cover. But I think, again, any more questions anyone has, it's now is a good moment to do that. Yeah.
Mentioned before, but there's technically no such thing as an original idea, like love stories and such. Again, Romeo and Juliet. An example I think of is sort of Beauty and the Beast. It's like that goes back a while. Even in Greek mythology, there's a 50 of it. And I remember someone sort of saying, if you can't be original, at least be authentic, which I always find interesting.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's original. Do you? I mean, there's a book by a guy called Christopher Brooker called The 7 Plots, and he's basically identified there are just 7 plots, and you can apply them to any book. the hero, the this, that, the quest, and yeah, and I think particularly somewhere like Malta, where you've had so many cultures have kind of collided with what is Maltese at the center of it, that everybody's brought their own versions of myths to Malta, haven't they? And yeah, what's the quintessential kind of Maltese story? Is there a myth or a sort of story that are told to children about Malta?
Even as someone who's lived in Malta, born and raised in Malta, I'm even surprised by some old stories and such. Like I remember I recently got the book of Maltese myths and folklore.
Yeah.
It's like looking at it going, I remember this version of a story, and it's like, oh, I don't remember this, or I've heard of this, but differently told. And it's like, an example I think of is, I remember there's one of sort of the shoemaker and a giant, I think. I can't think of the exact one. But I also remember one of sort of in mythology, there's the Midas with the donkey's ears.
Oh, yeah.
I remember being told of that in Malta about the Maltese sort of king and such. So it's interesting going, oh, that was from sort of Greek mythology, but then it's like we sort of kept it as our own in a way.
And if you read Shakespeare, there are lots. He's brought in a lot of things from other people, and I suppose when people tended to stay in their own culture, didn't they? So if somebody came from another land and brought stories with them, then they just got incorporated into the mythology of the island. So yeah, and another one I just thought of, the Don Mintoff book that's in that catalogue, which was published in 21, that I didn't know anything about Don Mintoff at all. And I'm sure I'm not alone out, in the UK, but I had a look at the book and I thought, well, clearly, possibly a divisive character, but obviously very important character, at a time when Malta was getting a lot of attention from people all over the world. And, I imagine this probably hasn't sold overseas. But this is doing all the right things here to appeal to readers of Margaret Thatcher by Charles Moore, Lenin. So it's putting Mintoff up there with those sort of figures. Again, I think maybe there's a way of rewriting this copy that assumes no knowledge at all of the reader, because it would be a shame if that didn't get us a bigger market. We've talked about that one, and we've talked about this one. So, I mean, I think if we just go back just 1 second to the formula, I think we've seen enough now to know that all these books we've looked at, they are all using this kind of balance of character. But I think a lot of things, it's about making a book relatable, isn't it? It's about you trying to see yourself in the shoes of that character, and I think. Which is why something like, Superman, we all love Superman as kids because we all like the idea of having a mundane life, going into a phone box and then coming out as a superhero and changing the world. And it's interesting that, post COVID, there's been a lot of talk about people wanting books that have optimistic, uplifting endings because there was enough kind of death and depression in the world, and we needed to do that. And actually, it doesn't seem to have been the case. I think people are quite happy to have really challenging, upsetting, distressing books because, you can't control a global pandemic, but you can, at the end of the day, you can put the book back on the shelf and it all goes away again. So there is a way of having this little universe that you can peek into and go away from. But I think we have a show in the UK, you might have a version of it called Dragon's Den, and there's one in America called Shark Tank, where people come in and they pitch ideas to 4 or 5 kind of, multi-billionaire kind of people who decide whether or not to invest. And it's utterly compelling because obviously the way it's made for television is a lot of people are just terrible. You just think, oh, they've got a really good idea, but they're not good at expressing it. Then other people who just come in with a kind of, AI version of a pitch, which it kind of says everything it should do, but you think, tomorrow they'll be coming in selling double glazing, or they'll be selling, you know, a new kind of water. They don't care. They're just reading from a script. And I think whatever you do when you're pitching something, you've got to do it with authenticity, and you've got to do it not be, you haven't got to pretend that you believe in it. You've got to believe in it. And if you're a writer, there's no point writing a book that you don't really believe in, because despite what you read in the press, it's not like, you know, you have an idea on Monday and the next week you're at the Oscars. You know, life isn't like that. So you've got to devote a lot of your time to it. And I think if you are, I mean, on many levels, the thought of standing up in front of people absolutely terrifies me, and has done for my whole life. And I went to university and I did a drama degree, which was it was a test for myself, really, just to see, could I do something that was 20% of it wasn't academic. It was, you know, actually doing, you know, standing in front of people. And I learned a lot from that. But I think what I learned generally from that was that, you know, with agenting, I've been doing it for 30 years. So standing up and talking about it, I don't find that challenging, because I know what I'm talking about, and I'm passionate about what the agent should be able to do is to allow people who are investing in something, a book, you know, our role is to try and find them readers. And I'm aware that there's a very narrow little door to get through that, with all these people to come in and actually have an agent who's then going to try and sell you. And then the publisher's got to sell it to bookshops as well. And, you know, you go into a bookshop, and I honestly just think the world doesn't need, you know, I'm not going to run out of books. I've got loads of books at home I've never read, you know, and what's going to make me take a book home? And I think, again, if you've ever got a doubt, this is a little exercise I keep saying to people, is if you're writing a book and you're just slightly unsure how to sell it, go into the biggest bookshop you can, and then literally go walk around the shop until you find the section that you think your book will be in, and then go and stand in front of where your initial would be, and then look at the authors either side and just think, what do I need to do to get my book from in here to on that shelf in between, whoever it might be, and then look at the packaging and look at all of that, because there is a kind of, you know, you go into a bookshop and you think every book ever written is in this shop. I don't know what to buy, but you know that Waterstones in Piccadilly, which is the biggest bookshop in my country, you know that what they're trying to do is say, it's all there, but you should buy something from the front table, something that's got a pile of books, because we all want to buy something that a friend or a, you know, acquaintance is also reading, because you can build community around books. So you just need to think very carefully, you know, what is that package? Because I've certainly had people writing to me with approaches for books, and their pitch is just, you know, you just want to say, that was a terrible letter. I've got a feeling the book might be better than you're making it sound. Can you go and have another go?
And probably little writers who have no idea what sells, and they're stuck to their guns, and yeah,
Yeah.
What would you wish a writer knew about certain realities of
yeah. I mean, I sat in this room last night, and there was Samantha Harvey talking about Orbital, which won the Booker Prize. And she said to herself, you know, she said to us last night, nothing happens in the book. You know, the space thing goes around the world 16 times. And at the end of the book, it's gone around 16 times. So there's no narrative arc. None of the characters are relatable in as much as none of them are walking on the earth. And, you know, so if you tried to pitch that book, nobody would take it, would they? But then she started to talk about how that, you know, how it was a book about nature, and you know, it was about observing, and it was about seeing the world from different angles. And you immediately thought, well, this is a book I want to read. And I know when she was writing it that there were some people telling her that she needed to make it, no pun intended, more grounded, you know. And she just, somebody else said to her, just make it even more weird, you know. And I think sometimes it's not, I think with literary fiction, you can cross genres, you can mix things up, you can do things. There are no real rules, I don't think. And I look for a voice, and I think if it's a literary novel, you want someone, you want to read something and you think, you know, this is, I mean, like, I was here last year with Paul Lynch, who'd won the Booker Prize for Prophet Song. I don't think there's no punctuation at all in the first, you know, chapter of that book. And that's because he's deliberately trying to create an effect with that. It's not just sloppy writing. So, I mean, to me, commercial fiction, it is about what's the genre and what can you as a writer do in a crowded genre that is going to make somebody feel that you're doing something different, you know, and it can just be a tiny, tiny thing. If you think of the Venn diagram with all these books overlapping, you want to feel that there's a tiny thing that a new crime novel's doing that nobody else has done, because the world doesn't need another procedural crime novel with a, you know, particular kind of, you know, jaded detective in a picturesque town. And, you know, we've got all that. So we need, but I think with literary fiction, well, it's a genre with no rules at all, other than, I think you've still got to serve narrative, haven't you? You've still got to make sure that a book isn't indulgent. But first and foremost, you can be as indulgent as you like, because there's nothing more indulgent than writing a novel, is there? You know, and I think with nonfiction, that whole rule about, you know, why me, why now, why this, you can't ask yourselves that more. I mean, I look at nonfiction books I was the agent for a few years ago, and I think they just wouldn't get published today because they were books about information. But
so why me, why now?
Yeah.
Questions.
Yeah.
They're basically almost marketing questions as well. These are questions that marketers ask.
Yeah, but I think if you write to be if you write because you want the book to be read, you know, and if you suddenly realize that, you know, you are, your background or your mix of areas of study have got you into a position where you think that you can say something that other people will listen to in a meaningful way, then you've answered the question, haven't you? You know, and I think it's difficult to talk yourself into that room to think I'm the right person. I think it's something that comes as a realization, possibly from yep.
I mean, why now question I just asked wasn't me pushing back.
No.
I sometimes feel that no writer's going to write a story they don't want to spend some time on. So I probably would not start with the commercial needs. But if it happens to, if after I've written a story, it fits in a commercial model, like really good for everybody, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the best, as I say, the best thing to start with this feeling. I can't imagine not writing this book. I think that should be the starting point. And then publication is the kind of, I mean, is it even the goal? Is it even the goal? You know, I think it's something, the goal is to finish the book. And I sometimes say to people, you know, I wrote an article once that, you know, about the misery of being published. Got a really good response. And I think what I was trying to say was, you know, sometimes, you know, do we want to judge success by whether or not it gets published? I think that the enormous success for anyone is writing a book, actually managing to do it, because everybody's got a novel they're not writing. But we've run out of time, and I'm sorry about the delay at the beginning with technology, but with all these things, I thought we're not going to have enough to talk about, and now we haven't got enough time in which to say it. But thank you all.